Hello, this is Hugh from Politically Challenged. Welcome to another exciting episode of our online show on YouTube. Today I've got a guest here. I've got Paul Southwell with me, serial entrepreneur and political activist.
Yeah, right.
No, he's not a political activist, but he does have his own views on politics. Today we're just going to have a freely open talk on several political events and issues that are surrounding society, including recent events. Ron isn't here today, he's not feeling too well, so it's myself and my guest, Mr. Southwell. So, it is how they say your surname, right? Yeah?
No,
No?
it's Southwell.
Southwell. Okay, perfect. All right.
That's okay. I don't mind.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I'll do that. So what I can do is we can, get started and talk about. First of all, we'll talk about the recent events where this radio personality, Mr. Danny Baker, he was fired from his job because of a tweet that was now deleted and that he now apologized for regarding the recent royal baby birth. Now you've all seen the tweets. He's talking about how the baby prince has been born, exiting the hospital, and it's like two people holding a chimp with both hands, one person either side of the chimp, and they're all holding hands. Now, because this child is a biracial baby, or at least multiracial baby, like at least 25% black, people have come out and said, oh, this is racist. He's been fired. A lot of people believe that what he did was, politically incorrect and insensitive. But the question is whether he actually deserved to be fired and whether he actually deserves for the police to get involved.
Are they involved?
Well, apparently they're getting involved in because they have to get involved because people complained about it, saying it's hate speech. So.
Hello, everybody, by the way, just to say hello. It's great to be here. So, are they investigating? Are they going to arrest him and interview him? Or what's this?
I doubt it. But the point is, I do believe that, it was a politically incorrect thing. It was insensitive. Whether it's racist, I personally don't believe that he was deliberately trying to be racist, but that is my opinion. I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, there's the bigger question for me is the actions of the BBC in being very quick to terminate his contract. Why couldn't they have been so quick to act on Jimmy Savile all those years ago?
Yeah, that's a good point. So what do you mean?
Well, you've got to question the BBC, haven't you? I mean, they came in for so much criticism about the Jimmy Savile affair, covering up his abuses for all those years, covering up or blocking the documentary that was about to come out, exposing his abuses before he actually died. So obviously they covered that up, and then when he did die, it all came out. But the BBC, knew about his behaviour. So, I just question the BBC. They, acting quickly to sack Danny Baker. It just reeks of, the BBC trying to kind of appease people and be seen to be doing the right thing, doesn't it? But I don't know. I mean, what about an internal investigation first? Why don't they investigate it? Why have they been so quick to act? Is it related
we live in a different time. That's no excuse whatsoever. When I say we live in a different time, I don't say, things are different now. People are more sensitive. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it is a comment on how bad things used to be, but it's also a comment on how intolerant we've become now. So in the 1970s, what Jimmy Savile did, the people that knew about it either did not want to end their careers or they actually didn't care and thought, well, who cares? Everybody's doing it. That in itself is a comment. That in itself is a worry because The fact that Jimmy Savile would have gotten away with it shows two things. A lot of people didn't want to get fired, and a lot of people just didn't care. And if a lot of people don't care, it's because to them it wouldn't have been anything abnormal about it. Or even if there were anything abnormal about it, they wouldn't care enough. They wouldn't think that it was abnormal enough for them to do something about it.
Yeah, well, it's
and
just...
then if you compare it to now, people want to react to everything.
Well, he was touching up young girls on BBC shows like Top of the Pops. He'd have their hand up their skirt. He was well known. He was renowned for having young girls come into his dressing room and do things to them. I mean, that was never acceptable, even in the 70s. You know, there was a time in the 70s where you think about the Carry On films, you know, the ooh-ah and, you know, that kind of saucy, sexual kind of innuendo. And you could smack girls' bottoms, I suppose, and, you know, kind of talk what we would deem inappropriate now, which wasn't inappropriate then, but it was never acceptable to put your hand up young girls' skirts and fondle them. And the BBC knew that was what he liked to do, and that they covered it up. It's just, you have this thing with the BBC where they believe they have the monopoly on morality, and they're always doing the right thing. You know, I suppose they are kind of a left-wing ideology, aren't they? Because they're a state-owned broadcaster, a public service broadcaster. So they're part of that left, and this is a thing of the left. This monopoly on morality, I think, that they care about the greater good, you know, equal distribution of wealth and so on. But, you know, for me, that's not the only issue. You know, you've got a kind of an anti-freedom on the left, haven't you? Because the left depends on legislation. It depends on law. It depends on government intervention. That's what socialism, liberalism is. It's big government. And when you've got big government legislating, it's coercion, it's force. So that is a kind of anti-freedom. And I used to have this conversation with our mutual friend, Lieber, who's from Cuba. And obviously there's a communist system out there. And he's a proponent of it. He likes it. It's great. He supports it. And I used to say to him, but it's anti-freedom, surely. It's anti-freedom. You know, you're legislated against. You're forced to live the way that the government decide. I mean, the government tomorrow could bring a law which says everybody has to be in bed by 9 p.m. Right? They could do that if they wanted to. That's anti-freedom. It's anti-choice. So we've gone off topic a little bit here, but this is one of my pet hates with the BBC, that there's this, you know, this beacon of morality that they seem to have. They care about everybody, when, you know, there really is an element of anti-freedom about it, if you ask me. And I just see them quick to act here without even an investigation as to what happened. You know, the intent behind the tweet, because a lot of people were up in arms about, you know, the racist elements of it. They've been quick to act to do the right thing. Well, you know, have they investigated? No. I've gone off on a bit of a one there, haven't I? But,
that's fine. But with this critique, is this critique specifically towards the BBC and their portrayal of the news, or is this a critique of the general mainstream media complex, so to speak?
All of the above, I would say. Have you seen these videos of Tommy Robinson, where he proves the lies of the mainstream media? You should see this. He's put some videos up where he actually shows that the BBC and other mainstream broadcasters have blatantly lied to their viewers. about things that he's said and things that he's done. Just completely untrue. It's quite fascinating. You know, there's a real thing with the mainstream media. I mean, there's big change going on in our viewing habits, isn't there? You know, scheduled TV. You know, we don't watch scheduled TV anymore, do we? You know, in a time of, you know, Netflix and streaming, video streaming, you know, we watch things, you know, when it's convenient for us. And you know, with the rise of, you know, the web and independent media having a big reach, mainstream media, they're scared, aren't they? They're scared, and they're lashing out.
I feel like it's fear. Fear would be one way to put it. The thing is, if you think about the fact that you not only have the mainstream media critiquing independent media and talking about people like Lauren Southern and Tommy Robinson, who have their own online platforms and their own online communities, and they villainize them and demonize them based on specific views that they have, but not as people themselves. The specific views that are deemed inappropriate or politically incorrect or just not sense. It's just not apropos with the status quo, according to the people that villainize them and demonize them. Like if I talk about Tommy Robinson saying that Islam is dangerous, for instance, or at least implying it, he goes on Good Morning or whatever, one of these morning shows, talking about he's not villainizing Muslims. He's talking about how the ideology is negatively affecting the followers of Islam, which are Muslims. So he tried to come across as sympathetic, where he feels like this is a ideology that negatively affects the people that follow it. And wow, I wouldn't agree with the ideology being negatively affected, because an ideology is essentially a set of beliefs. If you have people who follow this ideology, take the words and manipulate it in a fashion where they use the religion or the religious ideologies as a weapon to enforce their own preconceived views about the world, about men, about women, about everything, then you have a problem. I've met many Muslims in my life. I interact with people of all different faiths on a daily basis. 99% of them, like in fact 100% of the Muslims that I've met are stand-up people. 100%. The stories that you hear about so-called Muslims, the Islamists, not Islamic people, Islamists, the Islamist extremists.
Radicals?
Yeah, the radicals, those people. Those are people that they had preconceived views of the world and they read the Quran, but they had a tinted lens. They had these preconceived ideas sort of blur their vision, like seeing the world through a dirty window, and they read the Quran and they thought, yes, this makes sense, but they either deliberately or subconsciously misunderstood what the Quran was actually teaching, and they think, okay, because of this, men should always be in charge, women should always come second place, blah blah blah. Women should always cover themselves but why? Like if women want to cover themselves, that is absolutely fine. That is their right to do that as humans. If they don't want to cover themselves up, that's fine. That is also their right as humans. If you are telling people, oh, you have to cover yourself up, you have to, because, otherwise you're tempting men, that's not the woman's problem. That's the man's problem. If you're looking at a woman and you're that's not the woman's problem. But that's a completely different tangent. But in terms of these terrorists that pretend to be Muslim and say, they shout Islam-related things, and then they go and do horrendous acts, it's not because of Islam, it's because of people that were always going to be bad people. They just needed a vehicle, they just needed an excuse.
It is quite brutal though. I mean, I've read some of the Quran, and there is a lot of brutality in it. But I don't think it's any different to the Old Testament. You know, in the Old Testament, God is a brutal God. You know, it's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's the Old Testament. It's quite a brutal text. You compare that to the New Testament, which is, I guess, basically a biography of Jesus, of Christ, and his time on earth. It's a completely different. It's a completely different God. It's one of peace and forgiveness, and that's the narrative through that text. It's to forgive, to love, and Christ changed the world with his love. But it's the Old Testament is quite a brutal God, and you have that in the Quran. That it is killing. It is quite brutal. I just wonder whether it's ever a good thing to, you know, tell people how to have a relationship with God. We're going slightly off topic here, but this is something I think about quite a lot, because, you know, in the Islam faith, you pray 5 times a day, for example. You fast. I mean, they're fasting now in Ramadan. I mean, I can have a relationship with God. We all can. You know, God is there for everybody, but I don't need to be forced to have a relationship with God by meeting certain criteria. I can have my own personal relationship with God. So I always question that too. And another thing I think about is the Catholic religion, which, you know, I'm very critical of. I mean, it's they condemn, they judge, they criticise. I mean, they're anti-gay, aren't they? They're anti-contraception, they're anti-this, they're anti-that.
But again, that depends on it. It depends. You could argue that's part of the scripture, but again, it depends on the person. Because there are individual Catholics that may not be anti-gay, they may not be anti-abortion, they may understand it, they may have a more liberal sense. But again, like, it's the difference between the scriptures and the people. The people can choose to do whatever.
If you read the teachings of Christ, he was unable to condemn, to criticise, to judge, because he became one with God. And God is just love. God can't do anything but give love. That's all he is. It's a bit like, you know, an orange. You cut open an orange. What comes out of an orange? Orange juice. It is what it is. So if he's love, he can't be anything else. And you've got this Catholic religion that has this, you know, emblem of Christ, which they support, and they judge, they criticise, they condemn. Well, Jesus didn't do any of those things because he was unable to, because he essentially became God, one with God, and God is just love. So, you know, I mean, that's one of the worst for me. You know, this constant condemnation. But you don't really talk about that. I mean, they talk about the brutality of Islam, the mainstream I'm talking about. I don't really talk about, you know, the double standard and the hypocrisy of the Catholic religion.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because what I forgot to say, essentially, when you look at people like Tommy Robinson and Lawrence Southwell, people that we've mentioned on this online show before, Tommy Robinson, he says, he doesn't agree with the teachings of Islam. Lawrence Southwell went to Luton. She went to Luton to do a social experiment because she had found out that people had come up with these posters saying Jesus is gay and Jesus is trans, with rainbows all over the place. And most people, if anybody, nobody really condemned it. Nobody said, oh, that's terrible, how could you disrespect Jesus? So this woman decided, for some reason, to go to Luton, do a social experiment. Multicultural Society Luton decides to come up with like a table and some posters to give out to people saying Allah is gay, Allah is trans. What happened? People came up to her, insulted her, etc., verbal abuse.
Is Allah's God?
Allah.
That's God, right?
Yeah.
Not Muhammad, Allah.
Yeah, I believe it was Allah. Allah is gay as Allah is trans.
Okay.
And it was I'll put a link to the video. If it is Muhammad, then you'll see that I'm wrong. But I believe it was Allah. So he said Allah is gay, Allah is trans. People were shouting verbal abuse at her. People even called the police. And the police were like, oh, it's upsetting people, it's offensive. The police for posters.
Well,
But it was
people are
it was
nuts.
offensive, but at the same time, it was like, but the police are out here trying to solve crimes.
People are nuts, though, Hugh.
People are out here trying to stop, but like it was daytime, but people are out here trying to stop robbings. But yeah, posters.
People are crazy. I mean, I was watching a video on YouTube of a woman who was teaching about spirituality, and she was asked a question about Jesus, and she said that Jesus. I mean, one of Christ's teachings, and I've read a bit about what he came to teach us, what he was talking about, and he said that he was no different to anybody else. That he came not to show himself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he came not to show himself as the great exception, but the great example of what man can be, what all men can be, by aligning himself with who he really is, which is Son of God. We're all sons of God. And she was saying this. She was saying that that's essentially what he did. He aligned himself with who he really is, which is high consciousness, God. And the hate mail she got by people who accused her of hating Christ and blasphemy and whatever else, who understood Christ to be this, or to be God essentially, to be this superhuman from another place. But that wasn't what Christ said at all. He was man that just aligned himself with God, and he was there to show us as the great example of what we can all be. And I mean, didn't he actually say that he was only Son of God in that we are all sons of God? So the point is, people are nuts, people are crazy, people get triggered and they get offended by the slightest thing, and then they lash out, they attack. I mean, if it's a different viewpoint and it's not something you buy into, then that's fine. But to lash out and just seems a bit ridiculous. But maybe there's something there to be learned. Maybe there's a learning there. So I don't really react to how people kind of lash out. People do that. People are nuts. That's one thing I have learned. People are crazy. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah. So that's one thing she did. This Lauren Southern person. But yeah, apart from those controversial things that they say and do, because they have growing online communities that believe in these views, as opposed to the mainstream media that's losing credibility every single day because there's clear bias. Like, I'm not saying there isn't clear bias when it comes to people like Lauren Southern and Tommy Robinson, and even slightly less controversial people like Roaming Millennial, or like, I'm not saying they don't have biases. Of course they have political biases, but I feel like the issue...
Well, the BBC shouldn't have, should they? The BBC, they're impartial. They don't have a political bias. They shouldn't have.
They shouldn't, but it seems to me that every single one of these major bodies of news content do have a political bias, especially the CNN. It was most prominent when it was that Trump-Hillary election in 2016, and CNN were basically saying everything. They weren't even hiding it.
Yeah.
They weren't even hiding it. It was like,
the States is different.
Votes
the States is very
Hillary.
different. I mean, in the States, CNN is a very left wing. It's very on the left wing. Fox is on the right wing, and you have this throughout America. In Britain, the newspapers have political agendas, don't they? I mean, we all know what they are.
Yeah.
But
that was
the
to
BBC,
put it within the British sphere. That was most prominent when Brexit was about to happen. So you had, even if you knew nothing about what left wing and right wing was, you could clearly see which papers wanted to remain, like The Guardian and all these other left wing papers, and which newspapers wanted to wanted us to leave the EU. Basically anything that was ever touched by Rupert Murdoch. It's like, and all these other right wing newspapers like, I don't know, like the Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, anything with daily in it. I joke, but still.
Well, I mean, probably.
Except the Daily Mirror, which is supposed to be left wing and Labour leaning. So.
Well, probably because I don't know, but probably left leaning on a liberal side is bigger government. It's a support of more coercion, more legislation, right? I mean that's kind of the definition of liberalism. It's reform and progression, but through government, through force, essentially coercion, law. So anybody on the left is going to want to stay in Europe because it's big government. You're talking about a European government, a huge government, where on the right, conservatism. What's the definition of conservatism? Regression, to hold with tradition, market support, free market as opposed to state, which is small government, right? So on the right, you're probably going to want to get out of Europe because you don't want this huge body governing in Europe. You want small governments and you want kind of free markets to rule. So that kind of makes sense. I mean, I look at the Financial Times, which I don't know whether it has a political stance. I don't think it does. I think it's just financial news. But they were a big supporter of the Remain camp. But that makes sense too, because big business love regulation because it keeps support, it keeps competition out of the way. I mean, if you think about how businesses become billion-dollar businesses, they get there through regulation. They often lobby government to legislate, and for a big business to take on a few more people to kind of handle new law, new compliance, etc., isn't such a big.
You
big
say
issue.
big government. You say big government, and reform and progression through big government. I ask this partly because I've known you from before. Would you feel as if that is like antithetical of reform and progression, because the government would have absolutely no choice but to retain and reinforce the status quo? So reformation and progression, which are essentially concepts of things changing and trying to be better. Well, maybe not. Let's not say better, just change, and at least they're concepts of at least change. How can the very establishment that stays alive by establishing and reinforcing a status quo, how can they be trusted to reform the status quo? Maybe that's a question in itself, but I was trying to come off as unbiased towards that question. It seems, but like, there are pros and cons on both sides, left wing and right wing. Like, let's say there are a lot of conservatives that I'll leave it at that. There are pros and cons. But back to what we were saying about.
Yeah, well, there are. I mean, I like to just define everything. Then you know where you are, don't you? You put a definition on everything, then it makes life so much simpler. I mean, with conservative, obviously it's in the word, to conserve, to hold with tradition, right? But there's also an element of free market, that the market decides. But on the liberalism, it's reform, progression, but that's the interesting point. It's through force, it's through coercion, it's through legislation, which is kind of an anti-freedom, isn't it? If it's if it's forced upon you, isn't that anti-choice? Is that taking away choice?
Yeah.
No?
If anything is forced, then yeah, it does take away the free will and it does take away the choice. So in that respect, I would agree.
You could actually define governments as a monopoly on coercion. If you think about it, you don't have a choice with government, right?
But you would need some, even though I was biased before, you would need some form of government to regulate things, wouldn't you? Otherwise, what's the alternative? Like, For there to be no government?
Well, possibly.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is with, I mean, maybe. I mean, what about voluntary systems? You choose who you do business with, who you trade with, right? I mean, that's what libertarianism is, isn't it? Libertarianism? That's a thing in America. That seems to be kind of riding the crest of a wave at the moment. Ron Paul, he was a presidential candidate at the last. He was a.
I think it was 2008.
Yeah,
I remember that name because that was the bloke that. What was his name? Edward Snowden liked.
Yeah.
That was the guy that he followed and he wanted to win.
He was he fought for the Republican nomination, didn't he? And he was beaten. I don't know whether he stood in 2012. I'm not too sure, but that's his thing, libertarianism, which is no government. It's about choice. Everybody has a choice who they trade with, what they do with their money. They own their labours, they work, and then they sell themselves for a wage. And then their wage, they decide what they do with it. They're not forced to give it away in taxes to a government, to the federal government. They choose how they what they buy, what services they trade for that money. Then everybody is having choice in their life. Whereas in a democratic society, you could really argue democracy is very unfair because 49% don't get what they want in a democracy, right? And in this country, it's slightly ridiculous because we go to war supporting democracy and pushing democracy on the world, and we don't even live in a democracy. We have a ruling royal family. And again, coming back to definition, I mean, I like to define everything, and I think the definition of democracy is one voice is the same as any other voice. Well, your voice isn't the same as the Queen's voice because it's her government, and she doesn't vote anyway because it's her government. So how is your voice the same as her voice? That's not democratic. And yet our soldiers, innocent people, die in the fight for democracy when we don't even live in a democracy, which isn't even fair anyway. What's more fair, I think, is that everybody gets to choose, gets choice. Whether that's practical or not, with no government, I don't know. I mean, that's beyond my pay grade. I don't know. Maybe you need some form of government, but certainly small government, certainly a tiny government.
Or perhaps a government that wasn't so nosy, that wasn't just. So what you're essentially, would your compromise be deregulation then?
I mean, the thing is,
or is that a completely different thing in your eyes?
I don't know, but kind of, if you think about it this way: words you will never ever hear a government use or do use, and I'm talking Western Hemisphere governments. The governments of the West, Britain, France, America, so on. Compassion, empathy, understanding. Those are words you'll never hear from our government. They don't use those words because they're more of a mallet with which to beat people with. And if you're being beaten by a mallet, you're going to kind of come back in right? Well, surely we want to live in compassion, empathy, understanding for our neighbour. We don't want to be angry and fighting back from, a hammer on the head. And that's where really government are. They're all about force, coercion, brutality, violence, aren't they?
Well, the left.
No, government.
Oh, government. Sorry, I misheard. The government, not always. I mean, there are different sides to government.
You think government have our best interest at heart?
Certain individuals, yes. The system, it's supposed to, but that again, it's not. That's the system versus the person. There are people that have integrated themselves and inserted themselves into the system. They may not have the best interest at heart. the system, if you put it with the right people, or whatever the right people is, then they will have our best interests at heart. Basically, when you see things working for the benefits of the people, then you will know that the system, the government system, as a body of people and as a system, would have our best interests at heart.
How can it work for everybody? How can it be good for everybody? How can it please everybody? Is that even possible?
Are you talking philosophically, or do you want my personal opinion? Because in my personal opinion, I feel that because I've become slightly different from the person I was when I started this podcast. This podcast, I was center left. It's left wing, definitely. But now I feel as if the best way in this crisis that we're in right now, where people are talking about, oh, that chimp photo was racist. Whether you think is racist or not, it might have been, but not deliberately. But at the same time, that comes from a sense of it comes from a sense of insecurity. They see a tweet and it makes them feel some type of way. A tweet from someone they've never met before. It happens to be a white dude that put a photo of a chimp and said, "This is the royal baby." Even if he was racist, I don't care. I care that he shouldn't be racist, but at the same time, it's not going to kill me. It's not going to affect my life one way or the other. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't have a lot of money and is an ethnic minority. Like, honestly, I don't feel that it personally affects me as a person. I can't speak for all black people, but for me, it doesn't affect my life one way or another. I have bigger problems and even bigger solutions. I can't focus on tiny little things like that, but you can't control whether you're offended or not. But if you are offended, it might be from a sense of insecurity, not a sense of inferiority, but a sense of insecurity, because you look at it and you see a white man, photo of a chimp, he hates black people, and then you start getting angry, you start getting scared. And if this guy, what if he wasn't fired? What if no one complained? Then people would think, oh, this is acceptable. How can I live in this country as a black person and this is acceptable? I understand why the police getting into it would be a bad idea, because that's for police. But I also understand as a black person, and when I'm trying to be objective, I do understand why some black people would feel offended and think, okay, this is still happening in 2019. How can I see, if this is acceptable in 2019, then honestly, but then again, that relays back onto identity politics. There are black people that look at that photo and go, ha ha, that was a stupid joke. Yeah, maybe he should have been suspended, but maybe not fired. They have less insecurity. They know what they want to do, they know what they want to focus on. People who get offended by it, they may know what to do and they may know what to focus on, but they're focusing on the wrong things. Instead of, I believe that as a person, regardless of race, instead of looking at that photo and thinking, oh, this white guy hates black people. I have to think about the fact that it doesn't matter what he thinks, regardless what he thinks about the royal family, what he thinks about black people, white people, and none of it matters. What matters is how you think of yourself, how you think of your life, and what you can do for yourself and for the people closest to you. I don't know Danny Baker, or whatever his name is. He could be a decent bloke, he could be a prick, who knows? I don't know. All I know is that he tweeted he had a job, he lost a job because of that tweet that he apologized for straight after.
Well, he explained what it was about, didn't he? Does that make sense? I guess it does. I mean, it makes sense to me. And I can't imagine why, unless you want to be hated by the public and lose your job, why you would blatantly put a racist tweet up in the first place. So it's kind of feasible.
There was lack of hindsight, at least in my. Am I
It's
using the right word? He didn't.
Chimpanzee, wasn't it? It wasn't a black person. It was a chimpanzee.
It was a chimpanzee, yeah.
And that just, I suppose, that just buys into what the bananas on the football pitch, that type of thing. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm inclined to kind of believe what he said.
He was trying to talk about it like they're all circus animals, because
Yeah.
the royal family, they are always paraded around. They never get any privacy until they're like indoors. But even indoors, sometimes they don't get privacy. Everyone wants to know everything about their life, and especially these royalists. The media always want to know everything about what they're doing. Meghan Markle, she could take a fart and then they'd write a story about it, let alone have a baby.
But what about the way people's or society changes? Because, I mean, I remember there was a thing recently, actually. I mean, when I was young, we had to call black people coloured, right? And we don't do that anymore. We call black people, right? But when we were young, it was right to call people coloured. And there was a thing recently, this may have been last year, there was a personality, I forget who he was. He made a tweet about something, and he referred to black people as coloured people, and he was hit with that. People kind of hit him back with that. They were offended, and they attacked him on social media about this term. And he apologised. He came back and he apologised and said, I think he said, it's my bad, I'm an idiot and all this kind of thing. And I thought at the time, well, is there any real need to apologise? There was no malice in that. It was just, like me, that's how you referred to the black people at the time. That he hasn't kind of stayed with it, with what society now is saying is the right way to refer to people. I mean, is that really cause to attack him? It's a bit like...
It absolutely depends on the context and what he was saying.
It's a bit like my girlfriend said to me, I kind of made the term handicapped person, and she said, you can't say that anymore. You can't call people handicapped anymore. It's disabled. I didn't know that. So should I be attacked for kind of calling people handicapped when there's no malice in it? It was just I was unaware that the term had changed. It's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that is something I just realized. I mean, no, I always knew how to. I knew that you have to call people disabled if they're disabled, but
do you know that?
Handicapped. Yeah, I did forget that people used to call them handicapped. People who are disabled, but yeah, disabled. Even that to me, even that is like.
But just because
they have a
society
disability,
starts using a different term is the point, isn't it? If you're not up to speed on what society starts saying, well, we don't use this term anymore, we use this term. Well, if that's lost, I mean, I'm not a great one for, mainstream media and current affairs and things and watching television, so that might get lost with me. But you can't keep up with all these terms anyway. There's a term for everything now. I mean, like that staycation. I mean, I hate these terms. I mean, who comes up with these terms?
Staycation.
When we have a nice summer, people don't go abroad anymore. They stay at home and have their vacation at home.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So people call it staycation. Well, we don't even use the word vacation in this country. It's holiday. And you get these terms. I think the media bring them up. It's horrible terms. Oh my God. And because society starts using different terminology, if you're not up to speed with it and you use old terminology and somebody takes offence to that, are you to blame? I don't know.
That's true. It's very true.
It's like mixed race as well, isn't it? I think when I was a kid it was half caste.
It's half caste. It was half caste before. Now it's mixed race. Some people are now saying biracial.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Or multiracial.
Multiracial, yeah.
Which is technically everybody. Even.
Well, do you see they built that? They found the remains of that ancient Britain, probably the earliest Britain, 10,000 years old, and they built him up through DNA. He was black, so we were all black. Besides, we're all indigenous of this world anyway, and we all came from Africa, right? So, you know, we're all indigenous of this galaxy, this universe. I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous that in this day and age, when we've reached this level of technological supremacy, that we still take a dislike to somebody through the colour of their skin.
It kind of defeats the purpose of it all, because it's like, I understand every single person in this world they prejudge when it comes to race or culture, particularly ones they haven't been exposed to a lot. So you have your preconceptions, and a few of them might be negative based on what other people have said, or maybe one person from that culture did something and you think, oh, these people. That happens with almost everybody, if not everybody. Everybody's got their, you know, incorrect, ignorant views on specific types of people. Sometimes, like, it's not always racist, and it's not everybody's racist, but everybody's got their own preconceived notions. So, like, even with me, if you don't meet me, like, and then you meet me and I don't open my mouth, you might think I'll speak a certain type of way. At least, like, people have asked me, I'm lower middle class at best. My family, we don't come from a rich family, and I've lived in council flats most of my life. We're only middle class by attitude, but, like, I say I'm lower middle class, and the majority of the people I've hung around with are like middle class or working class. So that's me. But this is how I sound. But people ask me, why you're black? Or what, you sound so posh for a black person. I'm like, I'm not posh though.
You are well spoken here.
And yeah, but those are two different things. Working class people can be well spoken.
Yeah.
They can be. Like, the working class isn't just about how you sound or what you say. And I don't take offense to it. Some people might call that, left-wing people might call that a microaggression. But I don't. It's just how, it's a preconceived notion. They don't think I'm stupid because I'm black. But it's interesting because a lot of the black people on TV, some of them speak like me, but some of them don't. It's like, they know that they know that I'm not rich, and they know that I'm black. So but then a lot of the working class black people, even the well-spoken ones, they have a sort of tone to their voice where it's like, you could tell, like, I don't know how to explain it, because not everybody sounds like, I don't know, like Stormzy or Big Nasty or any of these rappers. But even black people that are well-spoken, they don't sound like me. They have this, like, you can hear people on the phone and you could tell that they're black from what they say or how they say it. Me, it's like the way they stress their words. Some other black people. Me, you can pick up the phone. You could tell I'm black, I'm not too sure. It might go either way. But yeah, people have said I have a white voice before, but the voice has nothing to do with the skin tone, and the skin tone has nothing to do with the voice. People can even choose to speak a completely different way. Me, this is how I just speak. I'm not trying to fake anything. But that's one example.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't even, what were you talking about? But, like, that's just one thing. So it's like, there's this, I believe that the world has become overly politically correct, but the problem is it's on paper. I see a lot of people on social media talking about, well, we should boycott this, we should do this, we should get rid of homelessness and make every homeless person a home, we should save the NHS. Some people protest, but most people don't. Even most people just do lip service on social media, including myself. I used to do that a lot. It's like, why are they bombing people? But you don't see these people joining Médecins Sans Frontières and Doctors Without Borders and helping people. They just talk about it on social media. It's like, oh, I wish I don't have the time, I don't have the money. But there are things that you can do.
Well, I think for me, I don't like the system. I would like to change the system, and I think demonstrating for anything other than changing the system is giving validation to the system, right? It's a bit like turkeys voting for better living conditions, and they still get slaughtered at Christmas time, right? You're giving validation to that, aren't you? The only real way turkeys are not going to get slaughtered at Christmas if they, demonstrate and overturn the need for Christmas. So demonstrating for anything other than that inside of that system means the system still remains. So I would like to see a change in the system. I think the system is, it's unfair, but it's incompetent too. It really is. It doesn't work. I mean, essentially, you have politicians who are great at whatever they're great at. I don't know what they're great at. They're great at talking, I suppose, and they can get votes. They're good at getting votes, getting people to buy into their vision. But then when they get voted into power, they become the chief executive of a $5 trillion business, essentially, right? A $5 trillion economy. You're running a business. And then the chancellor, he becomes the chief financial officer of a $5 trillion purse, right? They don't, most of the time, pretty much all the time, they don't have any business experience. How can that work? How can that be a recipe for competence? And then you have these ministers, these front bench ministers, that go from one portfolio to the next portfolio. So to give you one example, who's Hammond, who's the Chancellor now. Well, he was the Transport Secretary a year or two ago. So you embark on your career, right, which is in whatever industry it's in. You get to know that industry. You work for 5, 6, 7 years, kind of finding your feet and working out how the industry works, and you learn from people around you, and then you get better and better. You're more senior. Well, these guys do it for a year, 2 years, and then move to a completely new industry and learn all about that industry. So is Hammond an accountant or not an accountant? He's an accountant now, but he was a transport guy. I mean, how is that a recipe for competence? It can't work, and that's a system we work within. So for me, I mean, I wouldn't demonstrate for anything within that system, only for the system to change. I mean, I would like to get that voting percentage at a general election, the turnout rate at a general election, down to 0 figures. If we can get that down to 6, 7%, I'm not even sure they could form a government. If the turnout for a general election was 6 or 7%, I'm not sure what the Constitution says. They might be able to form a government, I don't know. But they would certainly have to do something, because the people are basically putting 2 fingers up at the system. So they would certainly have to start looking at a new system. And what you've got to remember is, we're the masters, the people are the masters. Government are the servants. We put a government in, they work for us. But it seems, with political correctness and everything else that's wrong with the world at the moment, it seems that the message has become slightly kind of lost somewhere, and you'd be forgiven for thinking it's the other way around, wouldn't you? That they in Westminster, that authority, the police, they're the masters and we're their servants. We're the servants. We do what they tell us. And that's got to be wrong, hasn't it? It's got to go back to the people. The people decide. We're the masters. That's what we should demonstrate for. Until we rise and recognise that, what's the point in demonstrating? Well, 3 million people walked on the streets of London in protest of the Iraq War. They still went ahead and invaded Iraq. What the fuck? But it'd be like the turkeys, just as I say, kind of demonstrating for better food. Still get slaughtered at Christmas. So that would be my thing. I mean, I don't think I'm going to vote again. I've always voted, and I felt that one should vote, because there are places in the world where people don't get to vote, they don't get to choose their government. So I always wanted to do that. But as I say, I would really like to bring that voting, the turnout rate down, and force a change in the system. What do you think?
I was always a fan of proportional representation.
Well, we had a referendum on that, didn't we?
No, we had a referendum on first past the post or the alternative vote, which was
Yeah, well,
I don't know
the
exactly what
alternative-
that was, but I just know that it wasn't proportional
Well,
representation.
it was a version of proportional.
It was a
representation.
version, but it was a version that the people that really wanted true proportional representation, one vote for one person, that's not what they wanted. So
Well, that's
first
what the
past the
Lib Dems
post.
wanted, because the Lib Dems had, back then, I mean, they had a big share of the votes, but only had like 40 or 50 seats, didn't they? And then when they joined the Tories in coalition in the 2010 government, that they went in with that condition that they would put a referendum to the people on a new voting system, and that's what they chose. An alternative vote, wasn't it? It was a version of proportional representation, but it was rejected by.
It was rejected.
It was rejected in the referendum.
I feel that in this specific country, obviously America, it's different. Or maybe it could be the same, because
It's the same here.
the argument for keeping the electoral colleges, the most dense populations that tend to be, the eastern part of the country, very liberal, they'd always win.
Yeah.
And then there will always be Democrats. And some people say, yeah, that's a good idea. No more Republican. You do realize that most Republicans are not as controversial as Donald Trump. And most of the Republicans are career politicians, just like the Democrats.
But America is a very Republican and right-wing country. I mean, the coasts, the West Coast, California, the East Coast, New York, I mean, yeah, they're very liberal, they're very democratic, but that ain't America. America's a vast country. And what the world sees is the East and the West Coast. America is very conservative. I know, I've lived there. It's a very conservative place. But it's the same here. I mean, we've all had the two parties here. Labour and Conservative. It's a two-party system we have here. That's why it's always been first past the post. That's changed slightly in the modern era, I suppose. I mean, we had the Lib Dems grew massively, and we had that three-party system for a while, didn't we? And now maybe it's moving beyond that. So perhaps there is, there is good call for looking at the voting system, but I can't see how it can ever work. When you've got people who've got no experience in business, just running a $5 trillion business, how can that work?
What isn't like the country in itself?
Pardon?
The country in itself.
Well, it's how different is it to running a business? Probably no different at all. Probably
But
the
then,
same
from
thing.
that argument, if you're saying that the majority of the America is Republican anyway, then proportional representation would be fine. But if you think about it, because the electoral college, they say, oh well, popularly denslated liberal populations will always win. But at the same time, if the majority of the people are basically Republican conservative anyway, as long as the Republicans emulate those views, or at least pretend to, then they win. But the thing with Donald Trump, part of his appeal was the fact that he was just out there saying all this stupid stuff. And he knew it was stupid, but it's not like he was like, oh, I'm going to save the whole wide world. He was like, no, America first, make America great again. But he was deliberately ambiguous about it.
Yeah,
It's like so that everyone
no
could
detail
think,
at all.
anyone could think, oh, it was great in the 50s, it was great in the 80s, it was great in the 70s.
Well, he used to say things like, we'll be great again. I'll make this country great. How? Give us detail. There's no detail in it. It was just, big remarks. But they love that in America, don't they? The idea of American being great again.
Unfortunately, I don't want to do this, but I have to. It's almost as if when my classmate, when we were in secondary school, he talked to me about Obama, and he kept saying, change is coming, change is coming. How is change coming? And then I'm like, well, it is. 8 years later, he had 2 terms, it's 2019 now. I'm like, what happened? What happened? What happened? There's Obamacare, and albeit the Republicans were trying to repeal that, but apart from that, this was a man that got the Nobel Peace Prize before doing anything. I was like, that is how?
That's not ridiculous.
Like Martin Luther King.
how many-
Martin Luther King hustled and
How
bustled
many
and risked
innocent
his
people
life.
did he kill, Obama? This
This was before all of that. He just became president. He became a Nobel Peace Prize, as opposed to Martin Luther King, who risked his life, his career, a relationship, everything for his beliefs. All those followers, all those people. 2 black men that got the Nobel Peace Prize. 2 African American men. Martin Luther King fought his way to get that prize, but it wasn't even for the prize. It was for the prize of freedom and civil rights. Obama was like, okay, you won. PR stunt. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like that's 2 different things.
He's a horrid guy. Remember we would have that
I
conversation.
wouldn't say that
in the
he's
library?
horrid, and I feel like Obama made mistakes just like any other politician or president. I wouldn't say he's as bad as some people thought he was, but I feel as if it was slightly disappointing because you could argue saying, okay, he was the president during a Republican majority Congress. They had the majority of the seats in the Senate and the House of Representatives. You could argue this so that his power was limited, as opposed to Trump, where Supreme Court, Republican, House of Representatives, Republican, Senate, Republican. He has more power. People can say, oh, he's rich. No, he had to give all his businesses away to his kids. Oh, he makes so much money. He donates his 100,000 checks. All the money, he donates it all. He doesn't need the money.
Is he racist?
What, you're asking me? Again, Trump is one of those people, most people, that may have preconceived ideas about specific groups of people. I'm not going to call out and say he's racist because he said stupid things about Muslims or Mexicans. I like that would be incorrect. Would I say that he's biased? Yes. Would I say that he's culturally biased? Yes. Would I say that he's racist? No.
He's a sexual predator, is he?
That is a completely different thing. I can't say that he's not, he doesn't have tendencies.
But is he fit for that?
2 different things, because number 1, there's Bill Clinton.
Yeah, he was impeached, wasn't he?
He was impeached. You could argue that what's good for the goose is good for the gander in that situation, but you also have to think
I
about...
did not have sexual relations. I'm going to say this one more time, Hugh. I did not have
sexual relations. But if you think about Trump, if you want to take down Trump on sexual charges, then we have no choice but to take down the people on the Democrat side and on the left side. If we have to talk about Trump, we have to talk about Al Franken. We have to talk about Keith Ellison. We have to talk about Cory Booker. And and maybe Joe Biden as well. You have to think about it from all sides. You can't just be like, I've seen
they are
people
talking about Joe Biden, aren't
they are now. They are
well,
because
he's put his hat in the ring.
Yeah.
So they are talking about it now.
They're talking about it now. The thing is, I've seen on the internet, people disrespect Trump. He's a predator, sexual predator, grab him by the pussy. But when it's Joe Biden and the woman, I say this because I forgot her name. I do apologize. We'll try and put her name in there as well and a link. The young lady that said he touched my hair and sniffed it. Yeah, I can see how that would make you uncomfortable. Fair enough. Fair play. That was it's a bit weird. But what were people saying about her? Oh, really? Can you believe this woman making comments about her looks, making comments about what she was saying? The same people that say Trump is racist, a villain, sexist, sexual predator.
Yeah.
But if it's Joe Biden doing this thing, maybe not grabbing people by the pussy, but
we were talking about this before. This is this slightly ridiculous thing about the right and the left, isn't it? Where on the left you're almost protected. Like we were saying that you can't go too far on the left. There's a line on the right, and if you pass it, that's it. You've had the conversation. There's no such line on the left. You can be a communist and you're still part of the conversation. And I think this is similar to that. I was reading recently that Obama's foreign policy was far, far worse than Bush. He was responsible for more civilian deaths than Bush was, invaded more countries than Bush did, committed more overseas troops than Bush did. A liberal president that was responsible for more civilian deaths than Bush. That's horrendous. That's horrific. But you don't hear people talking about that. They attack Bush. They attack Trump as they're doing now. And I think also Obama was responsible for more expulsions of immigrants than Trump also. But
I'll have to look into that, but
yeah, I read that. I forget when I read it, but you don't hear people attacking Obama in the same way they attack Trump, and you don't get people attacking people on the left as much as they attack people on the right. It's kind of a strange thing. It's this kind of like this moral authority. I think the left seem to have or seem to think they have, because they care about maybe the mainstream, but.
Although there is one person on the left in this country that is constantly villainized, and that is Corbyn. Corbyn is an interesting case because not even his own party thought he was going to win, except the people that voted for him.
Villainized by who?
The media and people within his own party.
Well,
individuals within the Labour Party are anti-Semitic, but they blame him.
Well, let's pick the bones out of this a little bit, because that's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, the anti-Semitic part of it, I think, comes down to his support of Palestine, right? And this official narrative you get,
where you have to be, if you're anti-Israel, you must be anti-Jewish.
Exactly.
Which is nonsense.
Exactly. So the official narrative that we've all bought into in the West, this narrative that's been driven into us, is that Israel are fighting terrorists, right? Hamas, terrorists. They're fighting terrorists. That's what we've been told in the West. And we
I don't believe that Hamas are not terrorists.
Well, the Palestinians, are they terrorists? No.
No, not that.
No. So, Corbyn is a supporter of Palestine, but like you say, it's not necessarily anti-Jewish, anti-Israel maybe. But I've seen a lot of videos, where Jewish Israeli soldiers beating up Muslim. Have you seen this?
I've seen a few videos like that, but on not that specifically, but something similar. It's terrible, really. But like,
and this, I mean, I was kind of Roger Waters on Pink Floyd. I mean, they boycotted kind of playing out there, and he talks about this. There's a documentary as well. Actually, what was this documentary? It was a brainwashing or something. It's the way we've all been brainwashed into believing this narrative that it's Israel fighting terrorists, when nothing could be further from the truth. It's the abuse of Palestinian people, and Corbyn supports Palestine, so that's come from that. And I think within his own party, it's the shift left. These people don't like. From New Labour, which was possibly a centre-right party, you could argue, right? The shift left, the shift to socialism, that's what they don't like. But possibly that's possibly where the centre ground is going, where the electorate is going. It's shifting left now.
That's because a lot of people have this idea in their head. But then you could also argue that...
Well, it's a change to the way things...
I feel like we do have to close because we have to close because we're running out of time. But I do feel that this also relays back to identity politics. You have people of color. Okay, I won't say that. People who are not white and people who don't have a lot of money, who may be white or not white. Basically, people who follow identity politics because they feel as if their lives can be changed by following and voting for a person that emulates their views. So if somebody who isn't, like, I think that's not the right way to look at things. Like, let's say I'm a black person, only child, single mom. We didn't grow up with money. I was on a special education needs register. Blah 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 blah. University student, graduated, master's degree, job where I'm not making too much money. That profile means that I should be left wing, but I'm not. I used to be, but I'm not, because I realize if you compare the left-wing ideology, the left-wing person, the typical left-wing person to the typical right-wing person, the left-wing person will say, okay, well, the reason why things are the way it is in my life and in society is because of external forces. The government needs to change. The economy needs to change. The job market needs to change. Everything needs to change. And then my life will be better. If I follow this specific person, this person promises no tuition fees, legalize softer drugs, hard drugs, whatever, and all this other stuff, lower the age to 16, all this left-wing stuff. And then I'll be like, yes, if I follow this person and they implement these policies, my life will be better. No, that's not the right way to think about it, in my opinion, because you can't rely on other people to make your life better. The number one person who has 100% responsibility on fixing whatever it is that you think is wrong in your life is yourself. 100%. That's me, that's you, that's whoever it is, no matter who that person is. Obviously, you could think about maybe people who are mentally disabled, physically disabled, need a little help. But then again, you can extend that to everybody. I'm saying you have the responsibility to choose and decide that you need to make your life better and make your habits better, make yourself better as a person and more productive and more effective to get what you want in life. You can't rely on politicians. You can't rely on the banks. People did that for years. Look what happened. Look at all them people that worked for 40 years, saved all their money, put it in the house, put it in the car, put it in the business. They put it in the banks. Banks lost all their money. They lose all their money. And then I cold call taxi companies. One person I accidentally cold called, they say, oh, well, I've lost lots of money in the recession. Somehow that came up. People lose money. Yeah. But then if you think about a right-wing person, the typical right-wing person, they think, okay, the issues that are facing the South and facing society are based on individual people. So me as a person, if I don't make enough money, that is down to me. If I am not healthy physically, that is down to me. I need to work out more, eat right.
I totally hear
it's
that.
the internal locus of identity as opposed to the left-wing person that would have external. Actually, no. Those are two different things. But the right-wing person, they'll be introspective and they'll think it's down to me and it's down to the individual. But the left-wing person, they'll blame everything else.
The only thing is though that you describe that quite well. But on the right, what you describe on the right is where we've been since the 80s, since Thatcher came to power. That's what we've been doing. We've been kind of focusing on ourselves and what we can do. And I see what's happening now is we're shifting left. The centre ground is shifting left. We're going left. We're going away from that ideal. That's what's happening now. I mean, Labour are probably the next government. We're going that way.
They'll have to be. There's no other option.
Yeah, but there is. I mean, just playing devil's advocate a little. I mean, there is taking care of the less privileged, or a safety net for people who can't take care of themselves. There's something to be said for that in a left wing system. People who aren't able to get out there and make something of themselves, whether they be elderly or disabled or what have you. There's something to be said for that. And with people losing the money when the banks go pop, with the system we've got, there's a compensation scheme, right? The governments they guarantee your savings. So, but you're right. I mean, on the left, it's about coercion, it's about force, it's about legislation, it's about government legislating to make changes for you on your behalf. Whereas you on the right, I suppose you go after it yourself. But it's all about the centre ground, isn't it? The centre ground is where the electorate is. That's always moving, and usually what happens is it moves in the opposite direction to the government that's in power. So we have a right-wing government now, although a lot of May's policies, a lot of her talking when she came in, which it did sound left wing, didn't it? You know, she was talking about kind of workers on boards and things, right? So it's right wing, and then you had the centre ground, which is the mainstream kind of position, moves the opposite way, it's moving left. And we're seeing that in the polls, so it's probably a Labour government.
It will be a Labour government.
Which will be a socialist government.
Whether that Labour government will actually succeed in implementing the policies they've been espousing for the past few years, that's a different story.
But it has happened in Venezuela. I mean, Corbyn was a big supporter of the Venezuelan system.
I
the
personally,
government, it's just all gone completely boss-eyed out there.
that alone adds to my point that I believe personally that when Labour become the next government, they'll fail. They'll evidently fail way worse than the Tony Blair government did, because Tony Blair's downfall was Iraq. Apart from that, people seem to like him.
Yeah.
That was his downfall. It was like LBJ. His downfall was Vietnam.
Yeah.
LBJ was the bloke that got the Civil Rights Bill in, and the other bills so that black people could do this.
Yeah.
Civil rights, and what was the other one? There was another one, 1964 and the 1965 bills that would basically give black people civil rights. His downfall was Vietnam. If he had just left that, he would have been seen as some freaking white saviors.
Yeah. No, but New Labour rode that. It rode that period where things were just beautiful, you know. But that came from. I mean, we had 10 or 15 years of that Labour government where the economy just kept growing and growing. And back then we were running surpluses on the economy, like in America under Clinton. We had big surpluses, but it came from low inflation, which kept interest rates very low. And that came from China. That was the growth of China. And the world was buying Chinese goods, cheap goods from China. That kept inflation low, that kept interest rates low, and it was just a boom time. Businesses were making big profits, booming, the economy was booming, we were running surpluses. That's why Labour were popular at that time. It was a centre, probably centre-right government because they were very pro-business. But I wonder whether it was because of China and the goods and inflation that was just a period where...
That's a way I've never looked at it before.
But it all went boss-eyed in 2008 when when the crash came. And I remember having a conversation with my dad about 2007, we looked at the personal debt on credit cards and mortgage debt. It was mortgages over 100%. People were borrowing on this cheap credit. Interest rates being so low, you could buy cheaply. Governments around the world are gorging on cheap money as well, buying and spending on infrastructure.
Imagine cheap money.
I know, right? And I remember saying to my dad, when's this going to stop? This is going to come crashing down sometime soon. Everybody knew it. People started to talk about it. It's going to pop. It's a bubble here. Everybody seemed to know about it except Gordon Brown, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, and Tony Blair. Everybody knew it was going to come except them two. And then suddenly crash, it went pop, and the rest is history. What happened after then. So they couldn't have been that great if they didn't see that coming. And I think it was a matter of just conditions and circumstances at the time, which may have been out of their control.
Perhaps. Mate, you could argue it's out of their control. You could argue there was a slight of negligence as well. But we should finish up soon. Well, about now, because we're running out of time. Do you have any final points?
I was just going to say about the last time we had a socialist government, back in the 70s, where income tax was up in the 90%. I think we're going to go back to...
That's terrifying.
I think we're going to go back to a situation like that. I think Corbyn will be the next Prime Minister, will be a socialist country. He'll nationalise a lot of things. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I'm of the opinion that government is incompetent, so I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But it will be taking money out of shareholders' pockets.
Yeah. Plus, if certain people are doing the maths.
I know we've got to go, but I was just going to mention UBI, Universal Basic Income, and get your thoughts on that. Whether we've got time for a couple of minutes to discuss that.
Perhaps very briefly. Do you believe it's a good concept?
I think it's inevitable.
So, like giving people like free money so that they'd have a base, something to fall back on, so that they can
Yeah, giving
follow their passions.
Yeah, well, giving every tax-paying citizen a wage, a salary. I mean, this is being taught. It's coming to the mainstream. This idea now, and it's being talked about on the left and the right. And I think it's inevitable. The way things are moving now in technology. I mean, AI, automation. I think a lot of jobs are going to be going to robots, and I think they're going to have to do this. This is going to be a thing we're going to see for sure. Labour are already talking about it. It's not in there. They haven't pledged it yet, but the Chancellor, John McDonnell, he's talking about this. I think this will be a thing.
It's a possibility, especially with automation coming around.
But do you think it's good? I mean, what are your views on it?
Yeah, as I said just now, because it might not register, it is a possibility as automation comes around and people lose jobs and they're replaced by machines. But at the same time, universal basic income, as long as it's not too much money, it's a good stepping stone. But
Well,
if it's a lot of
anyway,
if it's a lot of money, then it might just be it might be similar to the welfare system where people are just floating on the welfare system and free
But it's
money.
our money anyway. Like I said before, we're the masters. We put a government in, right? They work for us. It's our money. And they always talk about taxpayers' money, don't they? I mean, it's the taxpayers' money that is invested in Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland. Well, it ain't our money, is it? I mean, have you got shares in Royal Bank of Scotland? No.
No.
The governments have. So once we've paid them money, it's their money. It's not taxpayers' money anymore. But yeah, I mean, you do away with the social services and you just pay everybody a wage. And I think the idea is, if it's not a necessity because there's no jobs anymore, because all they've been taken by machines, the benefits or the thinking of the benefits of it are that it takes that stress element away. People still work, they'll still have passion to work, they'll do things they want to do, but you'll have your needs met. You'll have your roof and your food kind of taken care of. It will take that away.
There is that incentive though of having no money and thinking, okay, I have absolutely no money. How do I make money? And then it was something that you actually told me last week. It's not just about making money. How do you provide value to the marketplace? So I got to figure out what everybody's been complaining about, what everybody's been BSing about or bitching about. I'm thinking, okay, what is it that people want? What is it that people need? How can I fix this problem? And then create an opportunity so that people can alleviate themselves of this problem. And then boom, somehow the money appears. That's the plan. Like Jeff Bezos, I'm sure he knew he'd make some money. He didn't think he'd make billions and billions, or at least have a company that's worth billions and billions. Those are two different things. But yeah, he's a billionaire. Bill Gates and all these, richest man in the world. Well, maybe fourth now with the divorce, but.
Well, I saw a video of Jeff Bezos back when he formed Amazon, and he said that he wanted to turn Amazon into a business that did everything. And look at it now. Look at it now.
And on that note, we should finish up. But yeah, that is the whole point. We've talked about a few topics, gone into politics, money, political sensitivities, racial sensitivities, government, why it's good, why it's bad, left wing, right wing, a bit of everything really. But Paul, it was lovely to speak to you about these different topics. Hopefully you'll come back again.
Sure. And it was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, it's goodbye from us.
I didn't rabble on too much.
No, it's fine. It's good.
Ramble when I get going. Sometimes it's hard to stop me, but.
No, it's perfect. I mean, I'm sure we've got plenty of rich ideas. I just wish we had a bit more time, but schedules. But it's a goodbye from us today, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Sure.
And,
yeah, great talking to you, Hugh.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
How long was that?
Also, before we go, hopefully Ron will get better soon, and he'll be back on the podcast as well. So speak soon, everyone. Bye.